Alright, next thing I want to go over is a great little command called telnet. And telnet is a very old program that basically lets you open up a connection to a socket on a machine, either a local machine or a remote machine. Now, some people freak out over telnet and think that, you know, you're going to get hacked or you are a hacker if you use telnet. There's nothing inherently unsafe about telnet, right? But it used to be we would use telnet to log into other machines, and telnet doesn't do encryption. And so if you telnet to a machine and type in your password, everybody in the world can read that password. Um, and so, we use a different port and a different protocol from what telnet used so that we can encrypt information that we send. But, there's nothing wrong with installing telnet on your own Linux system. It's installed on a Linux server. You can use it to make connections to sockets. You're going to write Java programs that connect to sockets, and none of that stuff is going to use encryption. But you wouldn't want to run a login port on your server that accepts telnet connections, because people logging in would be exposing their password and so on. So if you don't have telnet, you can just say sudo apt install telnet, um, and it will go ahead and install it. Now, I've already got it installed on my system, but if you don't, it'll go ahead and pull it in. And it's already available on the Linux server. You can look at the manual page for it, and it basically tells you how to use it. But the only really thing you need to know is you basically say telnet, and then a host name, and then an optional port number. If you don't specify a port, it uses port 23. So what's a port? It's a way to identify a socket. The sockets we talked about in the last video are kind of like, places you can drop information into. Well, there's a lot of these sockets on each machine, up to 65,000 of them. And we identify them with a port number from 0 to, 64K. And so telnet, you can put in a host name, you can put in a port number, and it will open up a connection if something's listening to the other side of that socket. And if you go down to the bottom of the documentation, under bugs, by the way, it says the source code is not comprehensible. So that's, something that happens. All right, so what can we do with telnet? All right, so one machine I can connect to is time-e-g.nist.gov. That's a time server. So NIST is National Institutes of Standards and Technology, formerly National Bureau of Standards. And they run a time server on port 13. Well, when we connect to that, there is a program running on this machine which will respond to this connection request by sending us the date and time. March 29th, 24, and 14 minutes and 42 seconds after midnight. So that's universal time. And if I do this again, I get a slightly different time. Right now it's 14:53, 11 seconds later. If I were to connect to port 37, instead I get a couple of funny characters here in the beginning. But if I do this and I redirect my output into a file, I can dump that file in hex, and I can see that after the message saying, escape character is control bracket, quote, period, and this is character 10, that's a new line. Here's the actual information that it sent. And this is just 4 bytes, 32 bits of information, 868E. And if I do this again, and I dump out the contents of A, you can see that the number it sent changed a little. It changed from 868E to 86A7. So that's some kind of numeric timestamp. So why port 13? Why port 37? Well, if you look on a Linux machine under etc services, you'll see a list of port numbers. Port 13 is set up to specify daytime, right? What's the current time of day? Port 23 is where telnet would connect to. Port 22 is where we make secure connections using SSH. When you run your PuTTY program and you put in the host name and you say I want to do SSH, it shows you a port number of 22. Well, that's saying I want to connect to this socket whose address is 22. 25, simple mail transfer protocol. That used to be how you would send email. And 37 is a time server. which is, sending out binary information about the current time. And if we go down to page 80, what's that? HTTP, right? That's the World Wide Web. And you talk to web servers by making a connection to port 80. So for example, I can say telnet example.com 80, and now it's listening to me, so I can say get/index.html. So that's a fetch request. I'm asking for an HTML document called index, and I can say host example.com, and I'm hitting enter, but on my Linux machine that's causing line feeds to be sent. I'm going to send a carriage return by hitting Control M. That's the old, end of line character for DOS. And when I do that, I get a bunch of information back from the server. Starting right here, it says, message type 200, okay, some sort of age tag, various information here, and then I get HTML. Document type is HTML. Here's the header, which says example domain. Background color, so I've got some style sheets here, and this is a web page, and here's the body of the web page. It says example domain. This domain is for use in illustrative examples and documents. And so if I go to a web browser and I go to example.com, I see example domain. This domain is for use in illustrative examples. You may use this domain in literature without prior coordination or asking permission, right? Well, that's this. And then there's a for more information, which takes me to iana.org. Well, that's, this piece of the document right here. It's a hyperlink. And it sends me that page, and then it closes the connection. So we can use telnet to explore connections to sockets, and we're going to use this when we create our own server, which is going to be the next video. We'll hop into Java through Eclipse, and we'll make a server socket, which will listen to a port, and we'll connect to it through telnet, and start doing some communication in a way that will seamlessly carry over to communication between different machines.